Imagine waking up in a white room. You don't know how you got there. You don't know what day it is. You don't even know your own name. And somewhere, behind a one-way mirror, a man in a suit is taking notes. This isn't a scene from a horror film. These happened in real hospitals, in real universities, funded by the real United States government. And for decades, the people responsible did everything in their power to make sure you never found out. This is the story of the most ambitious, the most disturbing, and the most carefully buried mind control program in American history. The year is 1950. The Cold War is no longer just a political tension. It has become a psychological battlefield. The Soviet Union and China are winning a war that no one is openly fighting, a war for the human mind. American prisoners of war returning from Korea are saying things that terrify the intelligence community. Some are praising communism. Some are confessing to crimes they didn't commit. Some seem completely broken, hollow men who look the same on the outside but have been fundamentally changed on the inside. In Washington, the fear is not just military. The fear is existential. If the enemy can reprogram a human being, what does that mean for democracy? What does it mean for national security? What does it mean for the idea of free will itself? The CIA calls it brainwashing, and they decide they need to understand it, not just to defend against it, but to weaponize it. In April 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles signs off on a classified program. It is given a code name, Project MKUltra. The MK stands for mind control in German. The ultra refers to the highest level of secrecy. This program will operate outside of normal government oversight, outside of ethical review, and almost entirely outside of the law. Its mission is simple and terrifying. Find a way to control the human mind. The man placed in charge is a CIA chemist named Sidney Go. In public life, he is a mild-mannered scientist with a slight stutter and a fondness for folk dancing. In secret, he will become one of the most dangerous men in American history. Gottlieb believes the answer lies in chemistry, specifically in a Swiss-synthesized compound that has only recently come to the attention of the scientific world. It is called LSD, lysergic acid dieth, and in the early 1950s, almost no one knows what it does to the human mind. That is exactly what makes it so interesting to Gottlieb. The experiments begin quietly. At first, they are conducted on willing CIA volunteers who agree to take the drug under controlled conditions. The results are fascinating, disorienting, unpredictable, sometimes beautiful, sometimes horrifying. But willing participants aren't enough. Gottlieb needs to know what happens when someone doesn't know they're being drugged. He needs to study fear without consent, confusion without warning, and so the program takes a dark turn that it will never come back from. The CIA begins secretly dosing people without their knowledge. Mental patients, prison inmates, drug addicts. People who, in the eyes of the program, have no power and no voice. People who, the architects of MKUltra calculated, would never be believed, even if they tried to speak. But the program doesn't stop there. Subproject after subproject unfolds across the country. At its peak, MKUltra is running experiments in at least 80 institutions, universities, hospitals, prisons, and private research facilities. Funding is funneled through front organizations and fake foundations to keep the CIA's fingerprints off the work. At Lexington Narcotics Hospital in Kentucky, a doctor named Heresy Spell runs experiments on black prisoners who are addicted to drugs. He keeps them dosed on LSD for 77 consecutive days. 77 days. To this day, it remains one of the longest-known forced LSD experiments in history. The men are never told what they are being given. They are never asked for consent. They are simply used. In New York City, a secret safe house is set up in a Greenwich Village apartment. It is given the operational name Operation Midnight Climax. CIA operatives hire prostitutes to bring men back to the apartment, where they are secretly dosed with LSD, while agents watch from behind two-way mirrors. The goal is to study how a person behaves under the influence of the drug when they have no idea what is happening to them. The results are observed, photographed, filed away. The men who were brought to that apartment, ordinary men who thought they were simply having a night out in the city, have no idea that their minds are being used as laboratory equipment by their own government. At McGill University in Montreal, Canada, a psychiatrist named Dr. Ewan Cameron is conducting experiments that go even further. Cameron is not a marginal figure. He is the former president of both the American Psychiatric Association and the World Psychiatric Association. He is respected, he is celebrated, and he is doing things to his patients that defy comprehension. Cameron believes that the human mind can be wiped clean like a chalkboard, a process he calls psychic, driving and depaturning. He takes patients who come to him with relatively minor conditions, anxiety, depression, mild neuroses, and subjects them 2 weeks of drug-induced sleep, sometimes for 20 to 60 days at a time. He administers massive electroconvulsive shocks at 30 to 40 times the normal intensity. He plays recorded messages on loops for hours and days, trying to overwrite existing thought patterns with new ones. What he creates is not a healed mind. What he creates is destruction. Many of his patients lose years of memory. Some forget their own children. Some lose the ability to control basic bodily functions. Some never fully recover, and the entire time, they believe they are receiving medical treatment from a doctor who is trying to help them. The CIA is paying for all of it. Then comes the moment that changes everything. Not because the program stops. It doesn't, not yet. But because the human cost of MKUltra suddenly has a face. His name is Frank Olson. Frank Olson is a United States Army biochemist working with the CIA on biological weapons research. In November 1953, he attends a work retreat at a cabin in rural Maryland with a small group of colleagues. At dinner, Sidney Gottlieb secretly doses the drinks of the attendees with LSD without telling anyone. What follows is deeply disputed, and the full truth may never be known. What is known is this: Frank Olson has a severe psychological reaction. He becomes withdrawn, disturbed, deeply unsettled. In the days that follow, he tells colleagues he wants to leave the CIA. He seems to be on the edge of something. 9 days after being secretly drugged, Frank Olson falls from a window on the 13th floor of the Statler Hotel in New York City. The official ruling is suicide. His family is told almost nothing. They are given a cover story. The real circumstances of his final days are buried. It'll be 22 years before his family learns the truth. For 2 decades, MKUltra exists in the shadows. The American public has no idea. Congress has no idea. The victims have no idea. The program continues, expands, and eventually begins to wind down in the late 1960s as the political climate shifts and the original architects retire or move on. In 1973, facing increasing scrutiny and a changing political atmosphere, CIA Director Richard Helms orders the destruction of all MKUltra files. Thousands of documents are the evidence of what was done, the records of who was harmed, the names of the victims. All of it is meant to disappear forever. Almost all of it does, but not quite. In 1977, a CIA employee discovers a cache of approximately 20,000 documents that were misfiled in a financial records building, and thus survived the purge. A Freedom of Information Act request brings them to light, and, soothingly, the United States Senate is holding hearings on a program most people thought was the stuff of paranoid conspiracy theories. The Church Committee hearings of 1975 and 1977 forced the CIA to acknowledge what it has done. Senator Edward Kennedy calls the program a dark chapter in the history of American intelligence. Survivors begin to come forward, confused, traumatized, many still not fully understanding what was done to them or why. The testimony that emerges is staggering. One woman recalls being a patient at a Montreal hospital in her 20s, waking up weeks later not knowing where she was. She had lost years of memory. She didn't recognize her own husband. She had to relearn how to speak. She had gone to the hospital seeking help for mild depression. She had been used as a human test subject in a CIA-funded mind erasure program. She was not alone. The full number of people subjected to MKUltra experiments without their consent may never be known. Many records were destroyed. Many victims never knew what had been done to them. Many took their experiences to their graves, convinced that what had happened to them was somehow their own fault or simply inexplicable. Sidney Gottlieb retires from the CIA in 1973, the same year Helms orders the files destroyed. He moves to a small farm in Virginia. He takes up folk dancing again. He keeps goats. He is never charged with any crime. He dies in 1999, 12 days after giving a rare interview in which he expresses what sounds like genuine remorse for his role in MK. Whether that remorse was sincere, or simply the performance of a man who knew he was running out of time, is something only he knew. In 1976, Frank Olson's family is finally told the truth about what happened to their father. They receive a public apology from President Gerald Ford. They receive a financial settlement. They do not receive justice, because no one is ever prosecuted. In 1994, Frank Olson's body is exhumed for a second autopsy. The forensic evidence suggests that before he went through that window, he had been struck on the head. The medical examiner concludes that death may have been a homicide. The case is never officially reclassified. The family continues to seek answers to this day. In Canada, the survivors of Dr. Ewan Cameron's experiments eventually reach a settlement with the CIA in 1988. Each survivor receives $750,000. The settlement comes with no admission of wrongdoing. What does it cost to take someone's memories, to erase who they were before they walked through a hospital door? Apparently, $75,000 per decade of a human life. That is a question that hovers over the entire history of MK. And it is not simply the question of whether what was done was wrong. It was obviously catastrophically wrong. The question is, how was it possible? How was it possible that hundreds of scientists, doctors, administrators, and government officials participated in or enabled these experiments? How was it possible that universities accepted funding they must have known came with troubling strings? How was it possible that a democratic government, built on the foundational principle that all men are created equal and endowed with certain unalienable rights, how is it possible that this government decided some of its own citizens were acceptable sacrifices in the pursuit of psychological dominance? The answer, as uncomfortable as it is, has something to do with fear. Fear is an extraordinary motivator. During the Cold War, the fear of communist infiltration, of nuclear annihilation, of ideological defeat. This fear was not imagined. It was real, and it was enormous. And fear, when it becomes large enough, has a way of making the unthinkable seem not only thinkable, but necessary. It also has something to do with the invisibility of victims. The people chosen for MKUltra experiments were, almost uniformly, people whom the architects of the program believed could be used without consequence. The mentally ill, the incarcerated, the addicted, the poor, people on the margins of society, whose suffering was already largely invisible, whose voices already went largely unheard. This was not an accident. It was a calculation, and it is a calculation that history has made before, and will make again, unless we are vigilant enough to recognize it when we see it. Today, the name MKUltra has become almost too familiar. It appears in movies and television shows. It is referenced in pop songs. It has become a shorthand for government conspiracy, so widely known that it has almost lost its power to shock. But the real story should shock us. The real story is not about shadowy figures in trench coats or science fiction technology. It is about ordinary bureaucrats making ordinary decisions in ordinary offices, approving programs that destroyed ordinary lives. It is about the slow, quiet, systematic dismantling of human dignity in the name of national security. It is about a government that looked at its own citizens and decided, in secret, that some of them were expendable. And it is about the almost accidental preservation of 20,000 documents in a misfiled box that was never meant to survive. Think about that for a moment. If those files had been where they were supposed to be, if the paper had been in the right cabinet, on the right shelf, we might never have known any of this. The victims would have had no name for what was done to them. Their families would have had no answers. The architects of the program would have carried their secrets quietly to their graves, and history would have moved on, none the wiser. The truth survived because of a filing error. The last thing to understand about MKUltra is that it did not end cleanly. There was no dramatic moment of reckoning. There were congressional hearings. Yes, there were settlements. There were apologies. But there were no prosecutions. No one went to prison. The men who designed and ran the program lived out their lives in relative comfort, their careers largely intact, their reputations never fully destroyed, and many of the victims, the ones who were still alive, who had spent years or decades not understanding what had been done to them. They had to piece their own stories back together from government documents, from freedom of information filings, from court testimony, from the fragments of memory that Cameron and Gottlieb's programs hadn't managed to erase. That is a particular kind of cruelty. To have your mind taken from you, and then to have to fight for years, decades, just to understand what was stolen. The mind is not just a biological organ. It is the place where you live. It is where your memories are kept, where your identity is formed, where your understanding of yourself and the world around you resides. To violate that, to enter that space without consent, to restructure it, to damage it, to use it, is not just a crime against the body. It is a crime against the self. And that is what MKUltra was. Not just an intelligence program gone wrong, not just a Cold War excess, but a sustained, deliberate assault on what it means to be a human being. The program was classified. The files were destroyed. The architects went unpunished. And for a long time, it seemed as though America had succeeded in erasing what it had done. But the truth has a way of surviving, even when it's filed in the wrong box, even when no one is supposed to find it, even when the people who buried it are long gone. The mind, the human mind, with all its fragility and all its resilience, has a way of holding on to what it has lived through, and so does history.